Welcome to the Conversations Across the Grand Canyon podcast, aka The Big Gap. Here, our purpose will be to explore the impacts of social, political, and economic issues through the lens of generational and cultural differences. Good day, Middle Georgia. Welcome to the Big Gap podcast. I'm your host, Big Al Perry, also known as the Sonic Boomer.
Okay, Boomer. Okay.
Today, I'd like to get right to the gubernatorial campaign here in the state of Georgia. Both candidates have launched their first salvo of campaign ads. And right off the bat, each campaign is trying to negatively label their opponent. Rick Jackson has labeled Keisha Lance Bottoms as Greedy Keisha. In return, Keisha is labeling Jackson as Slick Rick. Starting with Rick Jackson's campaign ad, he has his campaign ad uses video of Keisha Lance Bottoms during the start of her administration as mayor of Atlanta, or perhaps in the campaign leading up to her election as mayor of Atlanta. She makes a statement that says she intends to be a good steward of the people of Atlanta's tax dollars. And Rick Jackson claims, contrary to that promise, she spent taxpayers' dollars on a first-class flight for her husband to the Super Bowl, whatever year that was. Also, in the first few months of her administration, she spent $11,000 of taxpayers' money on luxury limousine transportation services. Given Rick Jackson's past campaign ad history and my experience with transportation issues in state and national administrations, his claim against Keisha Lance Bottoms may lack a little bit of context. Not saying that there's not a kernel of truth in what he's saying about Keisha, but anybody who's even the slightest bit observant about this particular issue, it comes up in the news sometimes quite often. Government officials are often use official business to go to a city where there's a sporting event being held at the same time. They'll mix official business, maybe a 1 or 2 day conference in some city, and then spend another 2 or 3 days while they're there to get some rest and relaxation. Like I said, it's not uncommon for that to happen. Sometimes these transportation expenditures get a little mixed up during the transitioning from an outgoing administration to an incoming administration. All I'm saying is there may Rick Jackson's ad may be lacking some context. On the other hand, Keisha Lance Bottoms' ad focuses on uh, the words and video of Rick Jackson plainly stating that he plans to be a Trump clone, that the policies of Trump he fully supports. Any way that he can support him as governor of Georgia to advance his agenda, he will do. We have local news video of him here when he made a campaign stop during the primary campaign in Monroe County in Forsyth, saying that very thing. So I believe, in my opinion, that Keisha Lance Bottoms is taking her ad against Rick Jackson is taking nothing out of context. His words were depicted correctly. The video of him with Trump and on the campaign trail espousing that he's a Trump acolyte and intends to be a Trump clone. That video is unaltered. His words are unambiguous. Nothing's taken out of context. So if I'm going to give a grade, I give a passing grade for this first round to Keisha Lance Bottoms. Her ad, even though it's negatively labeling Jackson as Slick Rick, the ad itself remains focused on the issues. There's nothing untruthful or ambiguous about the ad. Whereas Rick Jackson's ad, like I said, my opinion, I suspect it may be lacking some context. So I hope that for Keisha's sake, because she has such a disadvantage in resources, that she'll be able to stay laser focused on the issues and be truthful. Because Rick Jackson, he's already spent, let's say, another $100 million. He's already spent on booked campaign airtime. So she's going to have to remain targeted and focused on the issues that her constituents and her base are passionate about and need her to deliver on. Now, turning to the other important campaigns that are going on around the country, different states, and of course, the races for the House and the Senate. Campaign strategy seems like I've been hearing these two words a lot. On the far left, they seem to want to label Republicans as having these fascist tendencies. And on the far right, they want to label Democratic candidates with the socialist label. They're tossing these terms around loosely, in my opinion. Scaremongering, in my opinion. And so I wanted to kind of drill down a little bit on those two terms and what they really mean. I'll start with fascism. True fascism, many experts will agree, is a mass political movement that emphasizes extreme nationalism, militarism, and the supremacy of the nation over the individual. Okay, this model of government stands in contrast to the liberal democracies that support individual rights, competitive elections, and political dissent. In many ways, fascist regimes begin as a populist revolution. They advocate for the overthrow of existing systems of government and the persecution of political enemies. However, such regimes are also highly conservative in their championing of traditional values. And those aspects of fascism, populist revolution, highly conservative, traditional values, they do resemble what we see in the Make America Great Again movement. Not saying they're fascist. Don't misconstrue what I'm trying to say. Because they're not fascist. But fascism does have aspects of it that are comparable to movements that rise up here in the United States. And also, fascist leaders typically claim to support the common man. And in reality, their regimes often align with powerful business interests. Again, I'm not calling anybody a fascist because I don't believe, like many people will claim, that Trump is a fascist. But he does align himself with business interests a lot. So there's an aspect of fascism that does or is comparable to some of the policies of the Trump administration. So any term that you want to throw out there, you're going to find aspects of it, whether positively or negatively, you're going to find aspects of it across society in general. In a diverse nation such as ours, different points of view, different opinion, different perspectives, they're going to mix and they're going to, well, have an influence on our governance and our society. Now, like I said, I'm not saying anybody's a fascist, and I'm not saying anybody is a socialist. But moving on to socialism, true socialist society aims for public ownership, fair sharing of resources. Its main advantages are equal wealth sharing, free health care, housing and education, meeting the basic needs for everyone. Disadvantages are a lack of personal business drive, slow growth, too much government control, with a high tax burden to cover the costs of the administration of regulations and the public benefits. So, personally, between the two systems, I would rather live in a socialist system than a fascist system, personally. And I think any rational, right thinking American in which we value freedom and independence will make that same, will come to that same conclusion. We actually have two figures in history, two prominent figures in the 20th century that we can kind of look to uh, further scrutinize these these systems. On the fascist side, there was Adolf Hitler. And anybody who knows anything about history, a student of history, knows how terrifying, how horrifying his regime was. Uh, I mean, it just goes without saying. So I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time on that. The other 20th century figure we have to contrast socialism or compare socialism to is Fidel Castro in Cuba. Castro set up his socialist regime on the island of Cuba after he was victorious in the Cuban Revolution, 1959. He was about a generation, a little more than a generation younger than Hitler, but they both fairly close in the 20th century. The Cuban Revolution, put it this way, the Cuban Revolution was more bona fide than our own American Revolution was. Our American Revolution started as it was more economic. It was about taxes. It started as actually a criminal act, destruction of property, the Boston Tea Party. And it grew from there. The Cuban Revolution was about basic human rights. Segregation on the island of Cuba was as bad, I would say worse, than the Jim Crow South or the apartheid era or the apartheid era in South Africa. It was horrible and tragic. Brown and dark skinned Cubans could not hold any civil service, high civil service jobs in government. They were relegated to menial labor, working in the fields, working in the service industry. And often, even in that, they were often not seen, I mean, completely in the background. So when Castro initiated, fought, and won his Revolutionary War, his intention was to set up a socialist government and to rule for a time and give up power. But unfortunately, during the during the period starting from the end of Eisenhower's administration to the beginning of Kennedy's administration in the 50s and 60s, the CIA secretly trained an invasion force to invade Cuba, retake power, and assassinate Castro. That invasion failed spectacularly. It was a misguided, misconstrued operation from the very start. Should have never happened. But Castro, he felt like he had to remain a figurehead in government and the iconic Revolutionary War leader in order for his fledgling government to gain footing and become established and set up his directorates. He didn't feel like he could abdicate that position until he was sure that he could his vision and the vision and the dreams of the Cuban people could be realized. So he stayed on because it was a heavy burden to bear to know that one of the most powerful countries on earth was actively trying to assassinate you. And through blockades and embargoes and economic sanctions and on top of the dire consequences of having the fear to be assassinated, all of that kept him or made him reluctant to give up power. And so he became, quote unquote, a dictator. But that was never his intention from the start. It was American policy that kind of forced his hand into his dictatorship. So now that I've, kind of gave you the true definition of both of these terms, fascist, socialist, I don't think we as Americans have to worry about being taken over by either system. We are a capitalist country. And I don't think there's any way we're going to turn back from that. Mainly because capitalism drives innovation, entrepreneurship. We here in American society, we have become addicted to innovation and technology advances. Indeed, the whole world has. We can't wait for the next big thing to be invented. We can't wait to upgrade our phones. We can't wait for the next advance that artificial intelligence is going to give us. We live for the next big thing to come along. And capitalism gives us the best opportunity to experience that. Look, I've already said that if I was going to uh, choose which system to be, I would choose the socialist side of it because capitalism and socialism can kind of work hand in hand. A democratic socialist society where you don't really give up democratic principles or technology driven economies, things of that sort. You know, Abraham Lincoln gave one of probably the most famous speeches in the history of the world. In that speech, he talked about of the people, by the people, for the people. That certainly sounds more like social than fascism. Of the people. Our leaders come from normal citizens, by the people. Our citizens choose who leads them, for the people. The government exists to help and protect the public. Fascism has no business being affiliated with those words. And here in the United States, like I said, capitalism rules and it will continue to rule. In our system here in the United States, we practice what they call free market capitalism, competitive markets, and with decentralized contracts. And that drives production with relatively little government control. Now, if we wanted to add a little bit more socialism into our capitalistic democracy, we could probably do it the way that the Nordic countries have done it. They practice a social capitalism. We're talking about countries like Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland. They have private markets, but they operate alongside strong government programs to help support public health and equality. So, if you're a citizen of one of those countries, there's a good likelihood you'll never pay a dollar for healthcare costs. You won't owe a bill for anything health related. You won't incur a single dollar of debt for education, or very little. Your education up to 4 years of college, maybe even a master's degree in one of those countries, maybe one or two of them. not a single dollar in debt, completely free. And even here in the United States, we have incorporated a little bit of socialism into our uh, government and for economic well-being, and that's Social Security, of course. Unbridled capitalism caused the Great Depression, and during that time in the late 1920s to the mid 1930s, this country was bankrupt. Like I said, due to uncontrolled capitalism. Many people became destitute, forced into poverty during that time. And as we came out of it, slow, slowly came out of it, the government said, we can't do that again. So government entities like the Security and Exchange Commission, FDIC, banking regulations were put in place to kind of keep an eye, keep things a little bit in check. Because industrialists and capitalists not only bankrupted and ruined their companies and their lives, but they brought down the average man, brought him to his knees. And they didn't have anything to do with what was going on economically in the top echelons of government and corporate America. So Social Security was a way to kind of cushion the blow. It was an anti-poverty program. And it's vital to this very day. So snippets of socialism can be incorporated into a capitalist society. And thank God it was done. So I'd like to, to move on from that topic, and hopefully, as I researched those terms, I kind of educated myself and hopefully brought a little enlightenment to my listeners as well. So, as I get ready to end this episode of the Big Gap Podcast, I'd like to quote the famous German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. The reason why I chose this quote is as we go through this campaign season, I implore everyone to, as I often do, don't shirk your civic duty, to be informed, to be conscientious, follow your conscience. Do your civic duty. Don't be influenced right off the bat by negativity. Always look at things with a little bit of a skeptical eye. Try to be curious. Don't take things on its face right away. We live in a society where people are always trying to scam you, especially in this age of artificial intelligence where images can be manipulated, sound can be manipulated. Getting back to that philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, he had this quote: "To predict the behavior of ordinary people in advance, you only have to assume that they will always try to escape a disagreeable situation with the smallest expenditure of intelligence." In other words, when faced with a problem, humans have a tendency to look for the fastest and laziest way out. Yeah, unfortunately, that is human nature. So many of us just refuse to think critically. The one thing self awareness, consciousness gives humans is the ability to think critically. And so many of us just refuse to take advantage of that advantage. So until next time, this is Big Al Perry. I'll be signing off today. And I'm sure my next episode, I hope to have a guest. And we're going to talk about public health, the issues that have seemed to cause the deterioration and the ineptitude of some of the agencies that are tasked with the health and safety of the American people. Talking about the CDC, the FDA, FEMA, those type of things. So until next time, it's Big Al Perry signing off. Try to be a good citizen. Stay safe. And I hope you stay healthy. Thank you.